Hey Pete, very good to see
Hey, Mark.
you. I just said to you, let's just jump right in and no agenda, no introductions. Pete, you've been making music for a long time.
Uh-oh. Uh, I start counting officially 1970. I was making music before that. Actually, some pretty good stuff before that, but that's when I moved to New York City and started getting paid.
So 1970s, like you define as becoming a professional.
I think so. Yeah.
Is that
I was in college in Boston uh, in the 60s, and I actually subbed with some orchestras there. I was a French horn player back then. But, it was around 1970 that I settled in New York City and went from there. So.
and the French horn was no more then, or
I played it for about 10 years. By the end of the 70s, I was so involved in doing keyboards that I just wasn't bothering anymore. And there was more work for keyboard players than for French horn players.
for sure. So was the keyboard your second instrument always?
Yeah, I played piano a little bit uh, in college, jazz piano, probably not very well. But, yeah, I've always kind of played it.
Hmm. And so maybe if you're okay with that, tell me a little bit about your childhood. I mean, like how did you discover music for yourself? Was that something that your parents kind of like helped you with, or was that purely on your own initiative?
Our parents were they both loved music very well. Uh, my dad had played violin sometime when he was a boy. My mother wanted to play cello but never did. She tried it once and she actually took lessons after she was around 70 or something. Decided she wanted to take cello lessons, and she worked really hard at it, and it didn't go very well, so she stopped. Uh, but they both liked me. There was music in the house all the time. I credited uh, it obviously Tony, my brother, came up through the same school system with the same experiences. Uh, uh, we lived in Brookline, Massachusetts, a suburb of Boston, and the uh, the music program there was very good. It was well funded. Uh, the teachers were really good. They were all professional musicians who were also teaching, but they were playing a lot on the side. Uh, the let's see, the was the head of the music department. Was the band director, became the head of the music department. Was also the director of music at MIT. The band director was a great trombone player. Was also the band director at Northeastern University. I'm sorry, in Boston, uh, and they were really good at inspiring young players to play, to try things, and to go into music if if they thought we had a shot at it. So I was encouraged a lot to do that. In fact, his name was John Corley, was the head of the music department. Uh, the band, the concert band at MIT, was they didn't have a music program there. Uh, it was all made up of uh, engineers, future engineers, all IQs way up high. They played instruments, in school, in high school, and they just wanted to keep doing it. But they were all very good players, uh,
Hmm.
and but there weren't enough of them to completely fill out a concert band. Uh, so he would bring some ringers from the high school in to play with the band, and I played fourth horn because the other guys were much better than I was. But it was a great experience playing very difficult music, way beyond what a high school band would have played. Uh, but it was like that. I was encouraged from all directions to stay with it, work hard at it, and consider going on into music. And Tony had the same background. Uh,
Hmm.
and encouragement, and look where we ended up.
So,
Itinerant.
yeah, yeah. And so this was like in your teens, right? Then, but when did you actually start? When did you first blow into a horn? Then,
Oh, I,
do you remember that?
mid-50s.
But
I'm an old guy, remember?
I know, but so you were still like you were not in your teens, yeah? You were under 10, or
Probably.
do you? Hmm. Wow, wow. And what was the? You said that the teachers were all great, and you described a little bit of who they were and where they come from. But what was the curriculum like back then? Was it like a combination of classical and jazz already, or was jazz already a thing? Was it
No,
actually just
there was
called?
no jazz program, uh,
Mhm.
and there were no classroom music things. It was the performing ensembles, the orchestra and the band and the chorus uh, that I was heavily involved with, and it was a great social thing to be in. Uh, we marched around on the field during football games and played concerts and so forth. And uh, it was a good experience. Right?
Okay, so you had like a private lessons with the teacher for your instrument, and the private lessons would cover like learning to play, like technically learning to read, um, also like maybe some ear training or something like that, or
No, that I didn't
was
get until I got into college. I went on into music school at Boston University, uh, and they had your training, then harmony training. Uh, a lot of it I kind of had instinctively. Uh, I'm fortunate that you can work hard, as you know, work hard at playing music, but there's got to be something inside, or else uh, you're not gonna. You may enjoy it, but you're not gonna have much success at it. Yeah, I was lucky to have. Oh, I don't want to call it talent, but I don't sound like I'm bragging, but it's a gift, uh, which I'm lucky enough to have. Uh, it That's just started to focus when I got into music school. It's interesting, or uh, in the same situation under the same umbrella. Well, all three music teachers in the high school who were encouraging me to go on and major in music. The guidance counselor at the high school uh, couldn't relate to that at all. Uh, how can you possibly earn a living playing an instrument? It's not possible. So they said, all right, if you're going to go to music school, get a teaching degree. And I remember this phrase well. So you'll always have something to fall back on. I said, okay, I'm being advised by somebody in a suit. Let me try. And I did. I got an education degree along with the music. Uh, in retrospect, or in hindsight, I can't think of a lousier reason to become a teacher, to turn around and intern and try to inspire kids, or if there's a classroom full of kids who want to learn music, and up in front there's somebody standing there who only is there because they couldn't get another job. Uh, I did. So I'm not a music teacher. I never will. I'm gonna.
so this topic of talent or being gifted or whatever, or having a rich imagination, or it's an interesting, it's a very interesting topic, I think, because like you said like it's not enough to be technically proficient or like let's say physically able to play a musical instrument. There needs to be something else. And 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 do you have any idea what drives that part in you? You know, that musical curiosity or whatever. Like I don't know. Do you have any? Have you ever thought about that?
Uh, maybe not focused in the way you're asking, but I mean, I always loved music. I was listening to it, forever, all the way through high school, and all different kinds of music, uh, and being in the performing ensembles in high school and then in college. And in college, as I said, I subbed with the Boston Pops several times, and with the Boston Symphony one time during the summer, not the regular season, but an amazing experience. Fritz Reiner was a scary. That was one scary guy. He would just look at you. Then it was like you. Okay. Uh, the Pops was Arthur Fiedler, which is the complete opposite. He was he was an entertainer. Really, it didn't matter whether he was on the podium or not, but he was great at public relations and he put on a good show. So the Pops was very loose. Uh, I remember he had a red Volkswagen. He was an unofficial or an honorary fireman in Boston. Uh, so he had a red Volkswagen with a red light on it, and a fire radiator. He would drive around and go to fires and get photographed. Uh, he looked like a conductor, with the long, flowing white hair. Uh, yeah, I started playing jazz and doing jazz gigs on the side in college. Again, Boston University had no jazz program then. This was a long time ago. I think all music schools probably have them now, which is realistic. And across town was Berkeley School of Music, uh, where everybody was going to learn jazz, and they were very realistic about it. So, yeah, you can get a degree or not; it doesn't matter. Learn to play your horn and get to know people, hang out, schmooze, get gigs. Uh, in Boston, it was yeah, you can do that if you want, but get the teaching degree. So uh,
So were you ever a schmoozer?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I did it because it was fun. Yeah, yeah. Or hang. I
Uh-huh.
guess the rule is thou shalt hang. Uh, uh, you get to hang afterwards at the bar, get to know people, go to other people's gigs, all of that. You
So do you remember anything about like your first keyboard gigs? Were those like piano or organ or Rhodes or
For a while, I was trying to play bass. Uh,
oh,
yeah, probably did it very badly, but it was on the surface. It's not a hard instrument to play. Uh, I say that with apologies to bass players everywhere. uh, it, uh, and also, I was able to borrow a bass from the school, and I never owned one. Uh, it, I faked it some. It was kind of it was fun, but it was also big. A nuisance to carry around, so I didn't go very far with that. But mostly piano. I was still taking piano lessons in college, which would be classical. Uh, uh, Playing jazz, I developed all kinds of bad habits, fingering and stuff, and then I would get chewed out of lessons by, sometimes, playing two notes in a row with the same fingers. No, 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 you don't do that. Stop doing that. I'm going to recommend you to another teacher. I got that a couple of times. Took me a while to focus and settle into something.
hmm. So it's like the way that I imagined this is that you were kind of like um, kind of surrounded by music and surrounded by opportunities, let's say, to kind of find your voice, right? Like without any, um, uh, as you said, there were no jazz schools or anything. So like having, as you said, like having kind of like a classical guitar, piano teacher, kind of like tell you what you
Yeah,
shouldn't
yeah.
do, and so, but still, you then learned and started to apply yourself to music and to the music that you loved, and what was your like you said, like 1970, what was like the first like proper gig you did?
Uh, as I said, I went to New York City uh, as a French horn player. Uh, I actually went. I went earlier than that. In 1965, I went to New York and to do a master's degree at Juilliard, uh, which was also a great experience. And that was pure French horn major, and uh, with some study in composition. Uh, at that point, any thoughts of being a music teacher, no, gone. I realized that I had wasted 4 years, but it was the wrong direction. New York was, suddenly exposed to great musicians everywhere. Uh, Paradoxically, my music tastes are very eclectic. And somewhere while I was in Boston, we had a Dixieland band at the college. It's just a bunch of guys and myself. And I got into playing banjo, which which is an easy instrument to play. It's like way easier than guitar. Certainly, it's only got four strings. All you got to do is strum it uh, and just play chords. No leads at all. No single string stuff. Uh,
Hmm.
and uh, while I was in Boston, I was working uh, a lot of nights in a local club called the Red Garter, which had a banjo band in it. It was three tubas. No, so I'm sorry, three banjos, tuba, trombone, and washboard. We played nothing written after 1930. I learned a lot. I learned a lot of songs. Uh, uh, Minnie the Mermaid. I could sing it to you now. I won't. Which we did with a medley, as a medley with By the Sea, and Paddle and Home. The stuff that sticks in your head. I don't remember where I was last week, but I remember Minnie the Mermaid. Uh, when I went to New York, uh, I was in an apartment with a roommate, going to school. I had no work at all because I didn't know anybody yet. But the Red Garter also had a club in New York in Greenwich Village, and I walked right into a 6 night a week job. Uh, Same thing: three banjos, tuba, trombone, and washboard. Uh, uh, a couple of good friends of mine were also in that band that I'd known in Boston. Dave Barjon, a wonderful trombone player, that moved to New York. He was playing trombone in that band until he got settled a little better. Uh, we were in the Dixieland band in Boston. But eventually, I stopped with the banjo nonsense because I started to get more studio work. And, the but somewhere in the early '70s, I got fascinated by synthesizers. I was still playing piano a little bit, probably not very well, and I realized that if I was going to focus on being a studio musician, in New York City, there are killer piano players coming out of the woodwork. That I was not going to earn a living doing that. French horn player, I did a lot of recording sessions on that. Synthesizers, that was like a whole new thing, and I got my first one in 1973. Oh, you can see it back over my shoulder with Daffy Duck sitting on it. You only see part of it. That's my mini Moog from 1973. I've still got it. Uh, I sold a lot of older instruments, but not that one. That one, you bury me with that one. uh, and that was a good. Uh, its 70s were interesting. It was a good decade for musicians. Everybody was working. It was a lot of work. Uh, it was a lousy decade for music. Disco had taken over everything. Uh, the recording sessions I was doing two, sometimes three a day, uh, carrying a mini Moog around in a big heavy case. It A typical jingle commercial session would get there at 9 in the morning. They want the band out by 9:30 so they can set up for horns or vocals or whatever. Uh, the piece is 30 seconds long, maybe 30 and a 60-second long. That was it. Uh, More often than not, it would be a disco groove. Uh, to make things go faster and record easily, a lot of producers would hire two drummers. One drummer would just do the hi hat. That's it, nothing else. The other drummer would play kick and snare. My job was to do the electric tom tom fills. Doo-doo, doo-doo, doo-doo. That was it. Uh,
Wow.
or a typical set. Star Wars came out in the middle of the '70s, which means I got to do laser shots and spaceship flybys. Like, whew, that's it. That's one key. Edit. I can go pack up and leave. Scale, I think, was $52 and change at the time. That's it. Another $52. Uh, I would have been trapped in that for forever. I've still been doing it up till 2000 and then retired. Uh, except uh, 73, 74, 73, 74. Oh man, how can I not remember what one of those? Good friend of mine, Howard Johnson, who died not too long ago, but he was a very remarkable tuba player, uh, quite well known. He played with the band. Uh, uh, had his own jazz group, four tubas and a rhythm section. It's called Substructure. Uh, Howard played gigs, jazz gigs, would be piano, bass, drums, tuba. It had tremendous range. He could do almost anything on it. I remember Howard saying to me once that there's no such thing as a limited instrument, only limited musicians. And he proved it. He won the downbeat poll almost. They might as well have just handed the miscellaneous instrument category to him because he just won it all the time. Uh, Howard was playing with Gil Evans at the time. He had been for quite a while. Uh, it was on a Tuesday. It was a Tuesday, maybe 8 o'clock at night, something like that. Howard called me. I was at my apartment. I'd come back. I was just, get ready to chill for the evening. Uh, Gil Evans was playing the Village Vanguard in a six-nighter, Tuesday through Sunday night. Uh, as I said, the '70s, it was a lot of work. Musicians were all working a lot. Uh, the French horn player in the band was also doing a show, uh, some a Broadway show of some kind. I don't remember who it was, which is probably just as well. So I don't feel so bad telling the story. But he lived in New Jersey. He'd come into town uh, to the Vanguard. He got there early. He opened his case. He'd forgotten his mouthpiece. And he said, "You know what? Hell, I didn't want to do this anyway. I got a session in the morning." And he just went home, packed up and went home. Said, "I'm out. I quit." So Howard called me at home. Said, "Pete, you got your horn?" So, well, yeah. He said, "Get down to the Vanguard like now." And I jumped in a cab. Uh, I played that week at the Vanguard, uh, and I was in Gil's band for 16 years until he passed. And, uh, that that first night was an experience, man. I'm like, wow, I'm surrounded by legendary players. I met Lenny White that night. Lenny was the drummer in the band at the time, and they had the Vanguard stage is very small, and this was a 14-piece band. So guys sitting like this, uh, and nobody wanted to sit next to the drums. Hard to get away from. So they just knew that there was a horn player that somebody nobody knew except Howard was coming in. So they left a space right in front of the drums uh, for the mystery horn player. And I came running in a panic, sat down, pulled up, and that was it. This huge ride cymbal right over my head. Uh, yeah, that's uh, at the time I thought that was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. That was a long time ago. Since then, uh, and I've been friends with Lenny White ever since. That was my that was my experience with that. And Go ahead. At some point, you got to tell me, Pete, stop. You got another question, but my next stage from that.
Oh, this is too good.
Oh,
This is too good. Keep going.
I, no, I could do Gil Evans for a couple of hours, but uh, I had the Mini Moog already and was just messing with it at home uh, and doing sessions with it. And I had told Gil about it, and he said, "Bring it in, bring it in." So it's okay. I brought it to it. He said, "Well, you play it, you play something." Uh, there were a lot of soloists in the band. We play ahead. There might be five or six long soloists, which for me, I didn't have the guts to stand up in that band. Uh, the players in it, Lou Soloff was in the band, Dave Bargeron, Howard Johnson, Trevor Colo was passed, Lou Marini did it for a while, Dave Sanborn did it for a while, uh, George Adams, Joe Beck was playing guitar, Ted Dunbar playing guitar, Herb Bushler, the bass player, several different drummers, Bruce Ditmus. It was an amazing band. I'm going to stand up, having never played a jazz gig in my life on French horn. No, I'll just sit here. So having the Mini Moog there gave, I played some stuff. The band would make up an ensemble course, and I played with them. But sometimes I'd make up parts for the head. Uh, and Gil kept telling me, do more of that. I said, okay, and I like it. And he started writing parts. Play this part on this song. Uh, I said, but there's a horn part. I said, don't worry about it. And he hired another horn player to come in and do what I couldn't get to. Finally, I just stopped bringing the horn, uh, and I added a clavinet to that also. I had a clavinet and the Mini Moog stacked on top of it, and that's what I did with the band. For about
Did this happen in the first few months, or was this over years, or like
maybe took a year,
how?
a year or so.
Okay.
I don't remember exactly,
Hmm.
but there was a point when
Hmm.
I became the electric keyboard player in the band, and as I think back, you uh, how many band leaders would let somebody do that? One of the regular members completely change their instrument, pushing aside the instrument that they were hired to play. Uh, and it says, no, don't bother with that. I'll get somebody else. You do that. It was just, yeah. uh, Reeling back to my experiences in school of having great, uh, great teachers encouraging. Uh, Gil was part of that. He was maybe the last great teacher that I had. Uh, he hired players for his band because he liked what they did. He liked the way they played. That's it. They might or might not fit into the band. By the '80s, that had gone almost out of control. Sometime, uh, at some point, I think the late '70s, maybe 1980, '81, Hiram Bullock came into the band. Uh, Hiram was great, irrepressible. It, Hiram used to say, "Well, I don't play jazz. I don't know what I'm doing in this band, but I'm going to do what I do," which for him involved singing, taking long solos. He was on wireless. Sometimes we'd be playing Sweet Basil, and Hiram would take a solo. He'd wander out in the audience. He'd go out in the street on the sidewalk, soloing from out there. We're playing along. Hiram is not even in the building anymore. Uh, I basically I learned eventually that Gil, listening to Hiram play, he heard a lot of Jimi Hendrix in Hiram, and it's okay. You're in the band. No, do what you do, not jazz. But Gil also refused to define jazz or what he did. Uh, he would just say, "We're just making music. That, that's it." Or an interviewer, a reporter, something would ask him, before a concert, "Well, you're going to do sketches of Spain and stuff tonight, right?" And he would get angry. He said, "No, no, that's something I did years ago. I don't do that anymore." Okay, uh, that was Gil, and he was great at encouraging young players, and I was still a young player at that point, to just do what I do, uh, which it became electric keyboards at that point. And that's 16 years. Yeah.
Yeah, that's almost as good as finding your wife, right? In a way,
Yeah.
like you find this place where there's mutual um, love, and I let you do what you do, and in in the context, as you say, of such an amazing band, there's um, yeah, there's so much that you can find and explore. And you said like you had the synthesizer, and what was it underneath,
A
a
clavinet,
cembalo or clavinet?
a
A
clavinet,
clavinet.
which
Hmm.
uh, for a long time, uh, I hauled the clavinet and the mini moog around in Europe. That's back when you could actually, ship a heavy instrument to Europe. No, just baggage. It didn't even cost anything to ship it. Uh, I still have the road case, the massive road case. It was big enough for the clavinet, the stands, the legs, uh, and a microphone stand that I used. I would prop it, I put the microphone stand in front of the clavinet, and so the mini moog was resting on the clavinet and the back of it on the mic stand. And it was this huge case on wheels that I had custom built. And yeah, the airlines would, yeah, we'd just take it, no big deal. Uh, I hauled that around Europe like several times. Like I was younger and
So on the clavinet, you were kind of like, would you say, part of the rhythm section mostly?
yeah, there wasn't guitar players would kind of come and go uh, through that, and there wasn't always a guitar player in the band. Uh, Gil played piano or Fender Rhodes a lot. A lot of times he would get very rarely an acoustic piano actually, unless we were doing an indoor theater. So he was usually playing Rhodes, but his way of comping, according, he would just stab at things or just play something completely unrelated, it's just something he felt like playing. Uh, uh, for everything that he was brilliant at, comping for soloist was not something he was good at. It was just not part of his makeup. So with the clarinet, I could do that. And depending on where we were playing, if there was a Hammond nearby, I'd ask him to bring that out. I'd play that some too. It was-
I mean, this whole story is so fascinating, Pete.
yeah,
The banjo. I had no idea, for
yeah,
example, but uh, it's it's like you had the opportunity to become like a complete musician by having work with strings,
playing banjo.
like blowing into something, and then also like to be like in the role of sound design guy in the studio making playing toms, and then becoming a soloist in the orchestra with a synthesizer, and then also being a rhythm player on a keyboard instrument. That's pretty amazing. Because it gives you like all the all the perspectives on the composition as well,
Yeah,
right? Because I see that as something really unique for like some musicians. They um, have had this opportunity to understand music from almost every
yeah.
perspective.
Well,
And
for an arranger
yeah,
or an orchestra, something
yes,
I did a lot of during the 80s and 90s, working for music production houses in New York, mainly. Uh, Composed some stuff. Uh, it wasn't great, but I discovered I was a good arranger. Uh, Orchestrating came easily because I knew the instruments well and did a lot of big projects that way. Uh, uh,
when you did do that kind of work, did you kind of like use the keyboard as sort of like the to try out ideas, or was this something that you were already so good at that you could just imagine it and write it
Sometimes,
down?
occasionally, if I wanted to experiment with some chord changes, I would. Uh, Somewhere in the 80s, I got into finale, but when I started doing that, there was no finale. There was computers would. just starting to become accessible in the early '80s, and there was nothing like Finale. No, actually, there was a program. I had it. I can't remember what it was. It wasn't very good. It was very rudimentary, and it printed out stuff on uh, an inkjet printer, which was all that was available, and it was barely legible. I mean, it was wrong. Uh, I remember I did try doing some charts that way once. I remember bringing some charts into a session and handing out parts, and Ron Carter, the legendary bass player. So uh, I handed him a part, and I probably called him Mr. Carter at that point. Uh, and he just looked at him, he scowled, said, "The bass clefs are too small." And I said I was mortified. I just walked away. So, uh, but and I'm sorry, I got off the mark. But the point was that to do arranging or orchestrating, uh, even if the computers were better, they were just too slow. The fastest thing I could do was put a piece of score paper in front of me and I'd check something on the piano occasionally, but just write. Uh, when it was done, send it over to a part copyist and move on to the next job. It's in a way that's still true now. Uh, I get asked occasionally if I compose on Finale. I don't. Uh, it, uh, the time it takes you to put the data into the computer just slows you down. If you've got an idea, play it, scribble it out, or something, or or just turn on a recorder or something and just make enough notes that I can figure it out again. But, uh, it's really not what it's really not what Finale should be for. It's for music notation and publication, duplication, transpose. Transpose. It's great. uh, uh,
I hear you. It's funny because I kind of do the same. Like I compose with whatever tools, but never I would never compose in a notation
no,
software.
it's just
That doesn't make sense to me.
what the computer. Uh, what a computer does well is reproduce or think or add one and one and see what you get, or subtract one number from another. That's what a computer does, and it does it blindingly fast. But you have to give it all that information first. You have to input the data, and that takes a long time. And that's also when mistakes get made. Uh, uh, so no, I don't do that. Something occurred to me also that just backtracking a little bit, that my background was very eclectic, or became very eclectic. Yeah, Tony and I were trained classical right from the beginning, high school, and we both went on to college. Uh, uh, Tony went to Eastman School at Rochester, a wonderful school. Uh, uh, I don't know if they had a jazz program. I suspect not. Uh, uh, Again, this was in the '60s, in the late '60s. Uh, so our training in the ensembles were all classical, or in case of both schools, the concert band, which was classical. Because the Eastman Wind Ensemble, the band was tremendously famous at the time. Uh, we kind of found ways to go out somewhere else. I remember uh, uh, going back a long way, but Chuck Mangione was doing his big orchestra concerts during those periods, and he couldn't always get enough strong players there, which surprised me because Eastman's a great school and they had great brass players there. Uh, but maybe because of my experience, uh, he used to bring me up to Rochester to play principal horn on a lot of his concerts, big ones, with chorus and orchestra and rhythm section, uh, which is where I met Steve Gadd. Uh, Steve was in Rochester at the same time that Tony was, uh, and I thought the three guys sitting to my right, I thought they were really good players. It was almost a little embarrassing why is Chuck bringing in a ringer from New York? But I hope they didn't feel. They must have felt a little bit strange. Who is this guy? Uh, but one of those times we rehearsed, and I had a night off in Rochester. And, at, uh, Steve Gadd and Tony were playing a lounge gig with Gap Mangione. Uh, in a bar, they were on a stage up in back of the bar, a small stage, just playing. People sat at the bar, and I sat at the bar and I watched the three of them playing. It was pretty amazing. That's the first time I remember Tony playing jazz, uh, and he did find his ways into that, and eventually did a lot of good jazz games. I played with Buddy Rich. Uh, uh, oh, he'll remember better than I did, but he kind of got focused into playing pop and rock, and he found the right artists to work with, and the right producers found him. And Steve Gadd did the same thing. And they both became very successful reasonably quickly. I thought my eclectic background. I was doing this. You know, I got a banjo gig tonight. I'm sorry, I can't come here in your band. Well, I needed the money. I mean, I put myself through school playing banjo. I, uh, uh, I got a very eclectic background, so I learned a lot about what other people are doing. Sometimes I could be part of it, sometimes not. Uh, anybody needed to know the chords from Minnie the Mermaid, I could tell them. But I don't recommend that for other people. I would say, listen to a lot of music, listen to a lot of stuff, but don't waste your time playing Dixieland gigs unless that's what you want to do. Uh, and some of the guys I played with back then, they're still doing it. They're still doing Dixieland because they loved it. I didn't like it. I didn't love it. I did it. It was a game. We got paid well. Uh, they, a lot of single women came into the club. Uh, nurses, stewardesses. It was great. A young guy in college. It was great. It was a lot of fun.
Like I sometimes wonder, like if you say like, yeah, maybe playing doing this gig wasn't important, but you've also said you've had this eclectic, or you have this eclectic background, and
Mhm.
like maybe even the things that don't seem like they were important in the grander scheme of things, they were.
Mm.
Like I don't know, maybe just for your even for your rhythm
Yeah.
comping on the keyboard later, maybe that the banjo playing helped. I don't know, just just thinking out loud here.
Mind you, we're talking about three
There's
banjos all whacking away loud, but none of them mic'd. Uh, we used heavy gauge steel strings and metal picks. Made them out of aluminum uh, to get volume, to get more volume out of the thing. And it was all strumming. I mean, it was no single string work at all. Uh, it was loud, ratchety, noisy. And it was fun. But beer was, no, they had hard liquor, but it was mostly beer and pitchers and peanuts. And the waiters would walk around, young guys, college guys, all yelling and singing along with the band, yelling at people if they weren't singing, uh, just making a whole lot of noise. And there were always baskets of peanuts in the shelves. And people would drink a lot of beer, and they crack open the peanuts and put the shells back in the basket. And the waiter would come along with a basket full of shells, just dump them on the floor, put it back. It was crazy. It was a crazy place. The owner was also a banjo player. It was his hobby. Uh, his family had made a fortune in the junk business. Uh, so he owned junkyards all over the place. And his hobby was playing banjo in this old ragtime style, not Dixie. We played no Dixieland. Uh, and I would not call it jazz at all. I don't know what it was. It was, I don't know, minstrel stuff, but loud. uh, it, at one point, he decided he was paying too much to the Red Garter chain to license the name. So he broke away from them, changed the club's name to Your Father's Mustache, and it continued that way for a few years. Uh, I still see posts on Facebook from God. Oh, he, he had 9 or 10 clubs all over the states. There was one in New Orleans, Chicago, LA. If you wanted to, you could go to another city and get a job there for a while. If you really felt you wanted to do that, I didn't. Uh, but I see, over the years, hundreds of musicians who played in those bands, uh, and they still occasionally have group posts or Zoom conferences on Facebook. Uh, a lot. I don't know any of them anymore. A lot of them I never met because I only played in the New York club. Uh, but it was a crazy time. I got an email just about 2 weeks ago from somebody who was a friend of an old friend of mine in New York. Uh, and apparently his father had passed away. His father lived in Woodstock, and his father was very fond of New Orleans, traditional New Orleans music. Uh, so the man wanted to find some musicians up here to play a New Orleans style funeral. And I'm going, geez, nobody up here does that, do they? I said, well, let me think. I called a trumpet player that I know, a jazz trumpeter, Chris Pace, a great trumpet player. Uh, he said, yeah, you can do that. I said, could you call some guys? I don't even know who to call. For about for about 30 seconds, I considered my banjo was around here somewhere. Uh, for about 30 seconds, I considered pulling the banjo out, making sure the strings aren't rusty. You get a new set of strings, and just playing the gig. And I realized to do that, unlike guitar, I mean, your left hand obviously is very important. The banjo, you play the melody on the top string all the time, and drop a chord underneath it. So you're constantly sliding up and down. Uh, well, these fingers go up and down, but this finger always is on top and always has the melody, always. So it's like this for hours with these heavy gauge steel strings. Uh, when I was doing that, you're back at your father's mustache. I had calluses on all my fingers. Now, of course, I have none. I figured, should I do this? Should I take this gig? It could be fun. Then I realized my hands would be bleeding after a couple of songs. So no, I didn't. So they did something. I had no chord instrument. I ended up 3 horns and a drummer. And he said it went very well. He thanked me for the call. That's it. Uh, the whole eclectic thing. I said I don't. In hindsight, I don't think it's a good idea. Uh, it's interesting. And I had fun all the way. I always enjoyed anything I was doing. Just making music, uh, listening to music. I'm open to all kinds of things. But it took me a long time to figure out what I really wanted to do. Uh, my first solo album was in 1989. I mean, it took me that long to focus on. I want to do this. I put a band together that I liked and did an album. And I actually had a record deal at the time. Remember those?
Mhm.
uh,
No, I don't.
Gramavision Records, a very unusual label. Uh, I was a millionaire philanthropist owned the label. A great guy, and he wanted to give back. Uh, his family owned half of New York City apartments, owned or controlled. I knew at one point it was something like over 2,000 apartments or residences in New York, in Manhattan alone. Uh, and he walked into that business, but he wanted to support music, so he bought a building uh, uh, down in Soho, built a huge recording studio. He lived upstairs, and he put in a circular staircase going from the studio, from the control room up to his apartment, so we could come down and just hang out with the guys and see what was happening. Uh, and all of the profits were donated to uh, uh, save the planet kind of causes. Uh, 'Cause he didn't need any money from that. He didn't make any money from that either. The people he was hiring, uh, we were not selling a whole lot of records. And he was do whatever you want. I'll put it out. The only exception was John Scofield, who was signed to Gramavision about the same time that I was. And he moved on after a while. And so,
But you did play with John Scofield as well, right?
I'm on a couple of his
At some
albums from
point.
the Gramavision time. And for a while, he was in Gil Evans' band. Uh, so I played with him during that. But I've never worked live in a small group with John. Uh, would have been nice, but uh, you can't do everything. Uh, but John's an incredible player.
Yeah, very influential for me. Even like I really enjoy.
We were on a tour. Uh, it was in the Far East, Japan. Uh, no, I think it was all Japan, at least this part of it. And Miles Davis's band was also on the bill. We were supposed to open for Miles. Uh, it didn't work that way. I think Miles's wife was traveling with him, Cicely Tyson, and she wanted no part of this, band, playing till midnight at night. It was messing up her day. She wanted to go shopping, have have, have dinner, go back to the hotel, or whatever. Uh, so Miles switched it. Miles was opening for us, which is ridiculous, but uh, there it was. Uh, and basically, the band would sound check. Miles never came to sound checks, and what he wanted to do was walk into the venue, uh, take his horn out, play a few notes, walk out the stage, play the gig, leave, and go to dinner. Uh, that was it. The point was, Sco and oh dear, Mike Stern were both in the band. Uh, Mike was a wonderful player, but he had at the time, uh, I don't want to say substance abuse. I think he was just drinking a lot, and he was not always right on it. But a wonderful player, very soulful player, a great guy too. But uh, yeah, the routines that I could see in Miles's band, he wanted everybody to solo to express themselves. But you taking a solo, your solo ended when Miles picked up his horn. That was it. There was no question about who was in charge on the bandstand. It was no mercy. Like uh, we watched for it was a long tour through Japan. Uh, and I watched night after night. When Mike played, Miles would let him go on for a long time. But John would go to play. He'd play like one chorus, and Miles would cut him off, like every night. And John was, what am I doing wrong? I'm trying so hard. This, it's the gig of a lifetime. Uh, uh, Plus, you got to be thinking that anybody ever played in one of Miles's bands like that has gone on to tremendous success. Uh, it was way into the tour. We were someplace in Japan, and I was down in the hotel bar. And I was talking to somebody else and drinking. Uh, and John came down into the bar. He was like, "Give me a drink." He was like, "God damn it, what am I doing wrong? I hate this. Is horrible. Every time he tells me he cuts me off, he won't let me play." Uh, I don't think he was saying that they let Mike do whatever he wanted. But it was he just felt, what am I doing wrong? This is God is telling me to stop playing. Uh, uh, and we're sitting at the bar, and Miles's road manager came down to the bar and said, "John, come upstairs. Miles wants to talk to you." And which is, what's coming. It's like nice knowing you. Here's your plane ticket. Uh, John came back down to the bar about 10 minutes later. Uh, he was like, and all he could say is, Miles said he likes my playing. And apparently that same night, Miles fired Mike and sent him home. That was he was testing both of them. Uh, yeah, I I had a couple of occasions to work for Miles. I never played in as one of his bands. Uh, I almost had an opportunity to do that, but I had other work happening that I couldn't get out of. Stupid. I should have quit whatever I was doing. Uh, but it's anyway. That's my experience with John. John's great. He's a great guy, a great player. As you know. Yeah.
So do you think that Miles really was like consciously doing these things, like, or was he also going by intuition and then kind of like,
Uh,
I mean, was he really testing
he's,
them? Like,
he's extremely perceptive, uh, and he he knew understood everything. He was also a visionary. I mean, he could see what was happening with those two guys. And we're not seeing, he tested both and gave Mike a good chance. Mike, of course, cleaned up completely after that. So uh, there's no bad end to that story. Uh, and John has been very successful, which is a good end to that story. Uh, and probably stayed with it until at some point Miles realized that it's got to change and change the whole thing, as he's done many times. And everybody will say, "Wow, why is he doing that? Why he was doing that? It was great." And 6 months later, they realized that he was ahead of everybody, and now everybody's trying to do what Miles is doing. So,
mhm. So let's come back to your first solo album. What was that like? Which band did you put together?
it was an elaborate project. I probably should have started with something a little more contained, which I did for the second album. Uh, I think there were 5 or 6 horns and a big rhythm section, and it was just a lot of my compositions. I think I did a couple of arrangement cover songs. It's been God, it's been what, over 30 years. I'd have to pull out the album to remember what pieces are on there. Uh, well, I think it was one of them. I was either going to pull it out to do it with the Levin brothers, or I did, or I pulled it out and Tony didn't like it, or I don't remember. But it was, and we recorded the whole band recorded live in the studio once and everything, which is I did that. That was the first time I did it, and I didn't do that again with one of my old bands until about 3 years ago. Where, again, went back into the studio with a sextet, and we just played. And what we played is what went on the album. So.
How do compositions come to you? I mean, how do you compose? What inspires you to write?
Uh, I'm not sure. I'll just get an idea. It'll come out of the blue, and uh, play it a little bit. I'll write some of it down. Sometimes I don't get very far beyond that. But if I got it written down, I can't go any farther. So I'll put it in finale, so at least I have it stored somewhere. Uh, I was looking for some untried material uh, just a couple of weeks ago because I want to bring some new stuff into the Levin Brothers quartet. Uh, and I found this whole folder full of, wow, all these songs, Untitled 3, 4, 11. uh, I opened them all up, and nothing's finished. They're all like half done, uh, not enough to put into a thing. I would have. Uh, there were two. I thought, oh, this is interesting. Let me work on that. Neither one of them is finished yet. But I don't know. I don't know where they come. It's I'm a better arranger
Yeah,
than a composer, I think.
I don't know, but the reason why I'm asking is that for me, the drive to actually compose something usually comes from some sort of from an idea that has really nothing to do with an instrument
Yeah.
even.
Okay.
It could be sort of like, I don't know, it can be as abstract as a feeling, right? Um, or just thinking of what would it sound like to have like three voices go like this, like, so more of a, uh, let's say, architectural kind of idea that then I need to try out and stuff like that. And that's why I'm asking, because, like, I don't know, like with Tony, for example, when I realized that he kind of like gets the idea for a melody, like he has
Mhm.
a melody and like the idea of sort of the harmonization already in his head. And so that's why I'm asking, like, what is it that, like, these little ideas that incomplete ideas that you've written down, are those chord changes? Is it a melody? Is it, what is it? Is it a rhythm? Oh, can you please describe for us what it
It's hard to
is?
say. I just ideas just come to me, but like yourself, it usually gets triggered by something else. Uh, I've for many years I've been doing music uh, to accompany video or film, and when I see an image, uh, music pops in my head right away, or a texture, uh, and I can blast something out really quickly. But just sitting at the piano, nothing, not looking at anything. Uh, I'll mess around. I'll find myself playing something that I played before, or just a ballad that I play on gigs with nothing yet. But an image will inspire me. I had an idea. Uh, okay, well, it's been a couple of years now, but in the '70s, as I got more electric instruments, electronic instruments, in the '80s, uh, I was early on. I had a computer controlling uh, modules of instruments in the early '80s, and it got very elaborate by the mid '80s. Uh, I was doing a lot of uh, orchestrating with electronics. I would call it electronic orchestrations. Uh, but I'm on a lot of film scores doing that. Uh, it, uh, the first time I did that, the composer asked me how I wanted to be credited, and something I don't know where I'd heard it, but the term electronic realizations came to me. And he said, "That's good." And put it. So I used to ask for that all the time. Electronic realizations, which meant it was somebody else's composition, but I was making it happen. Uh, I hadn't done that since the late '70s, the '80s. But during the '80s, I had a lot of projects that are all synthesizing. It, and a few things in the '90s, but to really do a serious compositional piece, I hadn't done that in decades. It was about 3 years ago. I decided I wanted to get back into that, and was searching for ideas. About the same time, I got the latest Moog synthesizer. It's out of the it's up here. That's a Moog One up there. This huge, expensive, big thing uh, that weighs 70 odd pounds. I brought it into the studio. That's it, staying in the studio. Uh, it's a 16 voice instrument, so I can do a lot on it. Uh, Analog processing, but all digital control. It's great. It's a great instrument. Uh, Not too many of them out there. They're very expensive, and I think Moog they wanted that to be their flagship instrument. Uh, Talked it up a lot, and pretty quickly found that everybody who was willing to shell out $8,000 for a new experimental instrument, yeah, they sold a lot of them in the first couple of months, and then it went down to everybody who was interested bought one, and that was it. There weren't many of us, but at the time, I was thinking, I mean, do a classical piece. And a piece that I've always loved is a suite Holst, the planets. And I got the score and I'm looking, man, oof, a lot of notes. Uh, but hey, it's MIDI. I can slow it down. I can play the violin parts uh, and multi-track, obviously, as long as I want. So let me do that. And I was starting to explore it, and I don't remember how I came across it, but I realized that Gershon Kingsley had done that many years ago. It's been done. Okay, so much for the planets. And I think, well, let me do my own. Let me take each planet, uh, get him and read up about each planet and what hits me. Uh, and I started working on that, but I got really busy at the same time. The Levin brothers were touring. I had a lot of recording work here. I was playing a lot of local gigs, and somehow didn't get much farther than that. But it was, uh, I mean, some of the images were, uh, Mercury goes real fast. Okay, so do that. Uh, Jupiter is big, ponderous. Okay, I got that. Jupiter. Uh, uh, Earth, because there's people with just a big uh, chaos, a lot of stuff happening at the same time. I decided to set up a hip hop groove and just play all kinds of stuff over it, whatever fit. Sometimes dropping the percussion out, replacing it with something up, and that groove would always be there. But like a cacophony of stuff. Uh, and of course, I can pull out uh, ethnic samples, well, all kind. You put a kodo in there for a minute, and some African instruments. None of this is completed. They're all ideas. Maybe I'll do it someday. Uh, uh, I'll get back to that. But it's the idea of, as you said, of the inspiration. Uh, and I should be asking you where yours come from sometime. It was maybe 2 years ago at the music camp up in Big Indian. I just sat in the back of the room in one of your classes, and you did a thing. You just started a note sustaining. We're talking about it, then added another note, and it was becoming a piece right in front of us. So like, unless you had worked it out ahead of time, you composed something right in front of us. And I was like, this is cool. Like, let me give you a call when this is over. Like, maybe I'll see if I can add a note to what you're doing. Uh,
Oh, that would be
uh,
wonderful. Yeah, for me, composition is something that is like anything I do with music is composition to me,
mhm,
and composition is what is really actually. I'm not a. I mean, let me put it this way. I'm not a performer. I don't feel like I am a performer. I am a performer because I'm a composer. So that it's that way. Like I need to perform because I want to hear what I want to compose,
okay.
and so that's why I was from the very beginning very much interested in composing in real time in the moment, and since I started in the late '90s, really, right? So in my when I was 18, 20, and that was the time when digital delays were affordable.
Yeah.
And in the mid '90s, there were like these. Maybe you remember it, like it was Echoplex, but not the old Echoplex, the new, like a 90-second loop delay.
Yep.
And those are the tools that I grew up with, and that I sort of like learned to master early on. And yes, I really love to compose instantaneously. It's not you could call it improvisation, but it's not, because if you play what you play, if you have a way to listen back to what you played immediately, you can respond to it just like a
Mhm.
composer does. And I just love
That's
that.
really the jazz process is mostly where I live in. It's improvising. Uh, Really, you have a structure, a chord structure and a melody, uh, and in between you're composing. Uh, you made 10 seconds after you play something, you've probably already forgotten it because it didn't get notated, unless it's recorded. Uh, but it's really composing on the spot, uh, which some people do well and some people do it very badly. But it's the nature of
You
jazz.
know,
It's good jazz and bad
and
jazz.
I think, like, for me, the way that I see the progression of improvised jazz, in a way, in the last 20, let's say 25 years, at least, like in my world, is that the improvisational part of jazz has become, or has stretched out to also include the improvisation of the melody and the form. So basically, let's say, like, the first statement you make improvisationally sort of becomes the head of the composition. So you sort of remember what you played, which means you can refer back to it, and by referring back to something, you're creating structure in the moment.
That'll
Right?
happen. It'll happen sometime. Uh, it's interesting. My take on Miles Davis, the soloing, or when he was playing the melody. A lot of times, he does a standard song that everybody knows, and he's kind of recomposing like the melody. But for Miles, had a tremendous technique years ago when he was playing bebop, uh, but he stopped using that. He said, "Well, that's not what it's about." But my take on Miles was his choice of notes. Uh, the band roaring, he would just pick one note, and wow, that that was the thing. That's a genius level. You can start thinking of people who performers who do that. It can be in any genre. Frank Sinatra would do that. Frank could hit a note, one syllable, and could get more expression in that syllable than a lot of vocalists can get in a whole set. Uh, it's a genius. You either uh, can conceive of that and have the technique to do it, or you don't. There's, uh, there's nothing in between. By the way, I suspect a lot of people would would take issue with you saying I'm not a performer. I think anybody who's just seen a Stickman gig uh, would probably argue the point. Would I would. Uh, it is if you're a composer creating stuff. Uh, yeah, there's big compositional factors in improvising. Uh, One interesting observation about jazz is traditionally you play the song, play the head, you improvise. Everybody takes solos, and you play the head again to go out. Uh, a long time ago, I went to, why do they bother? Why bother? Just a bunch of solos and stop playing. Uh, it's My take on it was that after all of that, which could go anywhere, and a Gil Evans band that very often did go to territory unknown, uh, uh, playing the melody going out, both the players and the listeners, the perception of that song would have changed because of everything that came before it. Which with Gil's songs with so many great soloists in the band. Uh, at any given point there would be 6, 8 horn players at least, plus strong rhythm section players. It could be 5 or 6 long solos in every song. Uh, there was one. Uh, it might have been the first week of the Village Vanguard. Uh, I think my first week with Gil, Howard Johnson was hired to play tuba. Uh, uh, he has some other instruments that he liked. He would play flugelhorn occasionally. And he had a little penny whistle that he would carry around, which is a great thing. Put in your pocket and you go sit in with bands, just pull this little thing out. Uh, uh, we played some tune. I don't know when I don't know what it was. It didn't matter. Howard took a solo, took the first solo, and he sat there like this. He's waiting, and waiting. Somebody else came around again. Howard picked up a different instrument. It took another solo. And Herb Bushler was a bass player, a great bass player. Uh, uh, Played only Fender bass. With all the soloing going on, he just had to keep cranking it out, just playing, and it's like you wouldn't play the same tune for like 20 minutes, 25 minutes. And Howard stands up, takes another solo, and Herb looked at him. He stopped playing and just sat there like this, staring at Howard until Howard's finally he finished his solo. He sat down. Then Herb started to play again. Crazy, but Gil loved all this. He loved it. He just wanted to see what would happen. But he went from his Sketches of Spain and Porgy and Bess years to he fell in love with Jimi Hendrix and blues. Uh, the blues origin. The band didn't play blues, obviously, but he said that's where the stuff is coming from. Some of it comes from Latin influences. He wasn't that into that. Blues, he was definitely into. Uh, and he just loved everything that happened. We the, we played when we were in town. We were in New York between tours. We played every Monday night at Sweet Basil in the Village, which is one of the clubs that's gone now. It was packed every Monday night. Uh, we're supposed we're supposed to play sets at 9 and 11. Uh, by 10 o'clock, there'd be enough of the band there that we could start. And Gil, there was no set list ever. 16 years. I mean, when we were recording or being videoed for TV, no set list. Gil would just he'd sit and he'd think, and he would just start playing one of the songs. And the veterans had been with her for a while. We knew what it was immediately. We'd find the chart, tell the newer guys, we're doing this, and it would vamp for a while, and somebody would count it in, and we'd start, and we'd be in the chart. He would do that at Sweet Basil. He would just start a vamp or something that implied one of the songs. We'd find the chart. Eventually, after a couple of minutes, we'd actually be playing the chart. And that would go on from 10 o'clock. And around midnight, 12:30 in the morning or something, Gil would come out of his reverie and just look up and say, did we play an hour yet? And we're like, yeah, I think so. And we take a break and go back on at 1:30 in the morning. And at that point, it was a school night. People were leaving in groups. We play another hour and a half or something. It's great in New York.
So when did you move upstate? Was that in the 90s?
No. It's been about 20 years now. 19. It'd be 20 years this summer. So I'd hit a point where I was traveling a lot and doing a lot of tracking work. Well, still doing tracking work in Manhattan, but not so much anymore. A lot of recording studios had moved out of the city, because it was just too expensive to stay there. It's frightening now, but even 20 years ago, New York City was very expensive. I always kept a car in the city. It was garaged in the basement of my building. It was $400 a month, to keep my car off the street. I used it to good advantage. I could keep some instruments, amplifiers, and stuff in the car because the lot of tenants knew me very well, and I tipped them well. But like doing Sweet Basil, I would just go downstairs with an instrument, pull my car out. I'd call them ahead, the car would be ready. I'd just drive across town to the Village. After 10 o'clock, you didn't have to feed the meters anymore. I knew not to show up at 9 o'clock. I'd be the only one there. and when I was done, get my car, drive back to the garage. So I was saving on taxi fares. That was my rationalizing for spending 400 a month. Uh, before I did that, I had hubcaps stolen, the car broken into, radio stolen twice, and so it's New York.
Yeah, it's New York. And what made you leave the city?
I'd hit a point where I was also doing a lot of tracks online for people I knew because I had been traveling for years in Europe many times, the Far East several times. Uh, so there were people that I'd met, uh, uh, they're working on a project and wanted to, could I add something? It was usually synthetic stuff, uh, not piano. I was doing it out of my apartment. That I didn't have a piano, uh, but I could, piano samples or Rhodes sample. I had two 6-foot racks of modules, all computer driven. Uh, so I could crank out almost anything there. Uh, so I was back over the internet. I was doing tracks for people. It's something that's commonplace now. It wasn't quite so common at the time. Uh, the point was, to do that, you could be anywhere. I mean, as long as you could get online. Uh, the internet was slow at the time, uh, but functional. Uh, it would take a long time to, if I did a keyboard track for somebody, it would take a long time for it to go out. I'd send and go to bed. Uh, uh, there weren't that many gigs in Manhattan, and a lot of recording studios outside of the city. Uh, I was coming up to Woodstock a lot. I had a lot of friends up here. Tony lived up here already. I was doing recording sessions up here. Uh, and it hit a point of like, I was spending a lot of money uh, to be right in Manhattan, and I really didn't have to be. If I needed to do a project for somebody in New York, I'd just come into town with the equipment that I needed, uh, take taxis or a cartage service that I used at the time. So I said, you know what, I'm just gonna let's move. I talked to my wife, who had been teaching in Connecticut all this time, and she had put in more than her 20 years. Uh, she was getting a little tired of it. Uh, both my kids were now living in New York City and working. And so she's by herself at the house in Connecticut. And we're thinking, you know what? Let's move. Let's change something. So I sold the house, sold the apartment. I bought an old farmhouse up outside of Woodstock. And we're still here. Actually, we just moved next door. So we're still here.
Very nice.
And this is a new studio. I'm
I'm.
going to put something on the wall in back of me.
It's a nice gray. It looks gray from here.
Ah,
I don't know which
well,
color it is.
it's a weird green.
It's weird.
Green. Get some pictures on the wall. I got a lot of posters and pictures of Gil Evans. We'll get them up.
So this whole business of creating music for pictures that you said kind of like came easy to you because you get inspired by images and you put your hands on the keyboards and something comes out and you have the orchestration and arranging skills to do that. Um, was that some sort of like would you say that at some point that really became just a job, or was it mostly still joyful for you to do that kind of work?
No, it's always been joyful. Uh, uh, there's some projects better than others, no, obviously, but I always worked for good people I liked. Uh, uh, the first, uh, yeah, it was the first guy I met was a composer named Jay Chataway. Uh, he's retired more recently. So you might not. be aware of them. But he did several feature films, quite a few actually. I worked on a lot of them for him. Uh, and then he got a gig doing the Star Trek TV series, uh, and he did that for 14 years. Or as he puts it, as he put it, he was lost in space for 14 years. Uh, and
That's why I knew that
yeah,
name
yeah,
from the
he's really
credits
good.
of Star Trek.
He's possibly my favorite composer producer I've ever worked for. He was uh, a musician, first of all, a decent piano player. He never played, but I knew he could play. But he had jazz background. He had oh, I forgot what labels he was with. Maybe it was freelance, but I don't think he was on staff as A&R. But he had produced albums for Maynard Ferguson, Gato Barbieri. So he had good credits in that area, and was a musician himself. Uh, Very musically sensitive about what was going on in the room and about what the people he hired uh, were thinking, what they were doing, what they were playing, what they were trying to do. And he was very open at letting people inject their own ideas if there was room for it. It's, a lot of times there isn't. Uh, uh, it For a lot of the projects that I worked with him on uh, were hybrid projects. As we'd be in the studio for 2 or 3 weeks tracking electronics stuff as the basis, and then he would bring in a string section, and they would overdub to everything we did. Sometimes horn soloists, sometimes a horn section. It depends on the budget, depends on the movie. Uh, it But for me, he was always very open to my ideas. Uh, a lot of times he'd be composing while we were in the studio. Uh, and once I learned his style, uh, there was at least electronically, I could duplicate a lot of what he did. And some simple cues. Uh, uh, he said, he would tell me, Pete, I gotta finish working on this one. It's not scored yet. Can you do this one for me? It could be, Chuck Norris sneaking up on somebody like for about 3 minutes. And I go, I got it. And which for Jay is, no, I won't do it. It just, like that thing you did at the camp. A little cluster, and he turned a corner, and I'd move it a little bit. And easy. I mean, nothing written down. Uh, Jay always gave me credits on that. He put me in as composer. Uh, I still get ASCAP residuals from those damn things I did in the '70s. Uh, ASCAP is film, film and classical. They don't miss a thing. But jazz, forget it. They can't even spell jazz. Uh, but some of those films, his early films especially, were uh, uh, we had a ball doing it. We would laugh all the way through them. The first one, it was a gig you would never take again. Well, they sort of did, but horrible movie, terrible. It was called Maniac. Uh, it, that he wanted to do some feature film work, and he needed some credits. If you haven't done anything, you can't get a gig. Uh, Now it doesn't matter; you can't get a gig at all in film. Uh, there are thousands of guys in Hollywood. A little studio. They're all well. Anyway, uh, Maniac. Uh, the star of the movie was Joe Spinell. Do you know that name by chance?
Yeah, and I'm currently looking it up.
He's Joe was kind of a big guy, very personable, actually, very sweet, soft spoken, but very ugly. Just pockmarked face. He was cast consistently in a lot of featured films. He's in all the Godfather movies. He just cast as a thug. You know, if somebody's going to get beat up, he doesn't. Uh, uh, one of them, one of the Godfathers, and the revenge thing at the end. Uh, he's the guy with the submachine gun who kills off one of the Dons, and the look on his head was like, yeah, it's like that. That's Joe. You don't want to give him too many speaking lines, but he got good at it, and he always wanted to uh, have the lead role in a film. So he got this script written, which was basically he plays an apartment building custodian in New York City who just lives by himself in the basement, uh, and at night he goes out and he just finds people and he kills them. Uh, Always a woman, sometimes a man and a woman, but always a woman. Never kills them, never twice in the same way. It can be a gun, it can be a knife, a machete, anything. Scalps a woman, brings them back to his apartment, the hair, at which point he's got a whole bunch of department store mannequins, women, and he nails the hair onto the mannequin's head, which you're laughing. Uh, it's funny. It's really funny. Yeah, he couldn't get an experienced director to touch it. What's the director's name? Frank. I forgot his name now. I'm sorry.
On this film,
Yeah, the director of the film. The only guy could.
William Lustig.
Yeah. This was the first film this director had done that wasn't a porn film.
Okay.
The best move they made was two good moves. One was hiring Jay Chataway to do the music. The other was hiring a really good special effects guy. Because when Joe scalps a hooker, he strangles her, and then he scalps it, and you can see the blood start to seep out, and you figure, no, the camera's going to pan away. It doesn't. It just stays there while he rips his back. And next thing you see, he's hammering it onto the mannequin. And we're watching this happen. We're going, yeah, yeah. The movie was terrible. I mean, it was really bad. And there'll be a good end to this. But even on 42nd Street, that had that whole line of porno film theaters, nobody there would play it. The Los Angeles Times, trying to make a statement, saying, "Okay, we got to draw the line somewhere." This film, first it got an X rating because of the violence. It was nobody swore, not one bad language, no sex, just the violence alone got an X rating. This is so bad that we don't want to take advertising for this film. They refuse to take ads. An admirable move, except that's censorship. And because of that, the entire film community rose up against it, speaking for the film. I remember Ed Asner on the news, on network news, saying, censorship, you can't do that. But there was no way to criticize the LA Times without promoting the film. The director, I apologize, I can't think of his name. Really nice guy too. There was one scene. A woman is trying to escape. Is in a room, a small room, in an apartment. They're trying to escape from the guy by climbing through a window onto a fire escape. As she climbs up, and you see up her skirt, and we're going, Frank, no, come on, you can't do that. And he said, all right, I'll change it. I'll take it out. He did. It wasn't dirty. I mean, you couldn't really see anything, but it was just tasteless. No more tasteless than the rest of the movie. But it's because of the publicity. Was it? Remember? was it Tom Kennedy? I got the name wrong. He had a late night talk show, a one-on-one thing, an interview show. Uh, they had the director on. He got 20 minutes sitting there talking about the film on national TV. So the film was a huge success, became a cult classic, possibly the worst film ever made. Uh, I hadn't seen it in years. I found it. I found a VHS copy on Amazon. You know, where you get to write reviews. Everybody was destroying the review. I gave it 5 stars, and they removed my review. I was like, uh, anyway, the point was that was Jay's entry into the film world. Uh, he got another one that was not so great. The same director did Maniac Cop. It was a little better. The music was better. Uh, uh, One of the signature sounds was the Maniac Cop. Uh, he would walk, always was on a night beat. He would just walk down the street whistling. Uh, so I had sampled my own whistling and I played the tunes. Uh, and basically, he liked the bad guys. It was the good guys he didn't like. So he'd go around wasting the good guys. And the thing is, you heard that whistle coming down the street, you better get out of here. Uh, and it, about getting inspiration or something. You're getting to the end of it. Jay had, he he had he was just running out of crazy ideas. I sampled Gregorian chants, monks, a room full of monks, and by playing them multiple two or three groups of monks chanting at the same time. I got these textures going on. It got to the end, at the end credits. Jay, I didn't write anything. Uh, Explain it in a second, but so P, we need something there, and this is just fun. So I said, you know what? It needs a rap. We got to get a rap going. Uh, and I said, okay, you do it. So I did. We created the Maniac Cop Wrap. Uh, I called a comedian friend of mine back in New York. Uh, it took him half an hour to send a set of lyrics. Uh, 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 he's the wrong arm of the law. I don't remember a lot of that. Somebody, he can't be stopped. That's why they call him the Maniac Cop. He had a line about you could something with poison. You could shoot him in an Uzi, but he'll still show up in your jacuzzi. I called the guy. I said, "Wait, no, come on, that's too crazy. No, it's got to be there. It's my best line. All right, it's in the movie." Uh, and none of us was capable of doing the vocals. We actually auditioned rappers, uh, and finally found somebody who was willing to do it. It was one guy came into audition. He said, I, I played it for him and I showed him the lyrics and I kind of read the lyrics down in rhythm for him, not attempting to rap. Uh, and he got to the end. He just looked at me and said, rap is an art form. I got, oh boy, okay. And he just got up and walked out. He was insulted. Uh, it Another guy came in, had no rhythm at all. Another guy came in. The only decent clue we got. I said, well, I always rap with my rap buddy. There's got to be two of us. And there was nobody else waiting. So we said, okay, he'll come back tomorrow. He came back in with his buddy. They got the gig. It's not the end credits, but uh, I must have it somewhere. I'll send it to you. Maniac Cop Wrap. It's cute. But in the middle of this, while we're doing it, and I got to do some suspense cues. I stretched out this one where he pops out of his grave. Never mind. It's enough of the story. Uh, in the middle of this, we're working just the two of us in the control room with the director. Uh, I don't believe there was any hybrid work, any organic instruments used on it. I think it was just me. Uh, uh, Jay's agent called him. It said Star Trek. They're opening up. I forgot the composer that was doing it, but it was too much for him because it was scored for a 90-piece orchestra, uh, high class production, and it was just too much for him to score one every week. So they said we need two guys and have them overlap. So Jay's agent got him a crack at it. So he left me in the studio making crazy music and scary music, popcorn spillers, we call them. Uh, everything's real quiet, and suddenly somebody gets their throat slit, and I go like this, and everybody spills their popcorn. That was a way of doing it. Uh, so Jay left me in the studio for 2 days, uh, writing, composing some of the tracks, and reading some of his scores while he wrote. Then we took a day off. Uh, he made some kind of excuse to the director, and the two of us drove to Universal stage and did the Star Trek recording session. I had a sampler with me at the time. Interesting visual inspiration. The that episode had an alien spaceship, but it was like a big thing, looked like a dirigible, uh, and it just kind of floated around. I don't remember the story. I just remember that. Uh, and Jay thought it. He looked at it, and it looks like a whale. Just this big whale. And he looks at Pete. Do you have any orca sounds? And I had a huge collection of samples that I carried with me. Mostly I think that I'd created or stolen myself or whatever. And yes, I did have orca sounds. So he got me on the session. Uh, it, I had one. I hadn't brought it with me, but I had borrowed an Akai S900 sampler. Do you remember those things? It was like basic. And actually, that's. Oh, and I'm going to go off on another tangent. That's one of the instruments that I thought changed the music industry. Uh, it was one of the first uh, inexpensively priced, easily accessible sampler that was available to the public. Everything before that was really expensive. That Akai was cheap, relatively cheap. I mean, it may have been 2,000, but that was cheap at the time for a sampler. Uh, so I had borrowed one or rented one there. I don't remember. And so I took it to the session. Uh, uh, the part copyist was a friend of mine. So he brought in a keyboard for me, and I brought a MIDI cable, and I just hooked it up, and that's it. My instructions were I'd watch on a monitor. Every time I see that, or whatever the whatever the particular sample that Jay had picked that he liked. Uh, uh, that it was just 90-piece orchestra in front, and they record direct to two track. Uh, they would run a multi-track in case they needed to change something only, but the mixes direct to two track were impeccable. Brilliant engineer Don Hahn was the guy at the time, and I got to know him very well. And yeah, his recordings, his orchestra recordings, his stuff was coming in were amazing. It just you can't change anything. That's been mixed in with electronic woodwind instruments, three synthesizer players, uh, 8 horns. He used eight French horn players. That was one of his signature sounds on the show. Uh, and so I was in between uh, Pat Coyle and Michael Boddicker, who both had huge synthesizer rigs. Michael, his stuff was set up in a horseshoe, and he was set up to the front of it, and his racks of keyboards are in front of him, maybe three or four of them, and way up on top, uh, a video camera pointed at the conductor because he couldn't see out. Uh, The other side of me with Pat Coyle, who lives in Nashville now, but he was an LA guy, one of the LA guys at the time, uh, also with a large synth rig. And in between is this big space uh, with nothing there but a chair and a direct box, or two direct boxes for stereo. You're waiting for on a monitor, the video monitor, waiting for the synth player that nobody knew. Nobody knew me out there. And I came walking in with an Akai S900, not in a case even. Part guy came running over with a keyboard. Uh, I found a road case. I just plopped it on that, and that's it. I sat there and I watched. Did this for a couple hours. It was great. Jay got the job, and as he as he put it, he was lost in space for the next 14 years before he started. Uh, Before he decided he had enough. Still trying to think of the name of the other composer, the well-known guy that's just not coming to me. But I apologize.
Was that Beltrami or something? I don't know. I can't remember.
I don't know.
But anyway, I think I remember that episode. I do. I'm certain
Really?
I remember that sound even. So
Oh,
like this Maniac was from 1980. You said, right? So so when did you meet Jay? Which year?
he lived in Connecticut, and I had a house in Connecticut. Uh, I knew him before that. I'd done a couple of studio projects for him locally, recording it in Connecticut. So he knew me, and he knew I used synthesizers, and that's what he wanted. He wanted electronics on it, and doing with it. I never asked him what his budget for Maniac was, but it was probably really low. Uh, uh, the fun afterlife of that, it was recorded in Dolby Stereo, which was relatively new at the time. And of course, we went overboard with that, ping ponging sounds. Terrible. What, terrible. I can't believe we did that now, but we did. Uh, and we saw a screening in New York, uh, and a lot of people who were in the film, uh, a lot of them who got murdered, are sitting there enjoying it. They're in with husbands or boyfriends or girlfriends. And I was there with my wife and Jay and his wife, and we're watching, we're applauding every time somebody gets scalped. Uh, and other people who were not ready for that were like, oh, and people were leaving. But I was just screaming. It didn't mean anything. Uh, and afterwards, out in the lobby, the screening was in Manhattan at some theater. Uh, Joe Spinell was in a suit and tie, like was out in the lobby, just greeting people as they came out, being very pleasant. He was a very nice guy, very sweet, soft spoken. Uh, and my wife wouldn't go near him. Okay, she just went around the back. I'm out of here. uh, uh, well, uh, that was it. That was the maniac. Oh, we saw it
Yeah.
again in Danbury, Connecticut, because we wanted to see it again in a theater. Uh, and there was only one theater. Uh, uh, let me think. There might have been something in Hartford, but we didn't want to go that far. But there was only one theater easily accessible that had Dolby Stereo. So we went there. We're sitting in the balcony. Again, we're having a great time, the four of us. And people downstairs were like, the women were screaming. People were leaving, walking out. It was horrible. And I've told you about the afterlife of the film. It was a huge success. It made a lot of money, and I still get a little bit of money. And I don't know, $20 or something. Maybe quarter from ASCAP from my popcorn spiller. I did one. It was at another film date at a much better studio. It was for a good film, actually. And Jay wanted a good scary sound, a popcorn spiller that we hadn't used before. And there was a piano in the there was a baby grand piano in the studio, which I wasn't using. I was doing all electronics. But I happened to have in my pocket, I just come back from a European tour, and we had stayed in the Munich Hilton. Uh, whatever reason, but only significant because they put the key on this big brass key fob, keychain, big clunk of a thing, so nobody would steal it. Of course, I forgot, and you know, I got, I was going through the metal detector at the airport, and I said, "Whoa, stop!" And it was this thing, and I said, "Okay, you can go." So I came, I brought it back to the States. I realized that scraping that thing across piano strings was like this, and we could change the speed of it with tape speed. Used that a lot. I sampled it, of course, so I didn't have to do it 20 times and wreck the studio piano. Uh, uh, I had a lot of fun doing those, but for Jay, I think as well as me, I learned a lot from him. Uh, how to work with other musicians, how to appreciate what they're doing for you. Uh, Jay was great at that, and also how to look at something and say, this would fit, this would make that work better. Uh, that's kind of been ingrained in me for a long time. So that's a 20-minute answer to a simple question. I'm sorry, but
No,
I get a lot of inspiration from visual things.
no, very good. I have like this question has, or this topic has come up a few times in these conversations. So you have really lived through, say, like all the decades so far of the development of music technology, and I find this fascinating. Like for me, I became aware of music electronics, let's say in the mid '80s, maybe um, even before. Well, when synthesizers first got the MIDI plug, like I remember that. Um, so and since then, a lot has changed. Like you said, like the affordable samplers in the early '90s, and then obviously people starting to record their DAWs at home in the early 2000s, and now at this time, like with the software we have available, like we can do anything, right? Like you could carry your sample library like on your phone, and have all the sound in the world available, and even the technology to mangle those sounds on you could have that on your phone. So can are you kind of like still really interested in new sounds and new technology when it comes to this, to music, to sounds,
Um,
and would you and do you think there's going to be like something even more mind-boggling than what we already have?
yes, is a simple answer. Uh, uh, a, a couple of things. There was electronic music, quite a bit of it happening before the 70s. Uh, it involved a room full of equipment, uh, big tube, vacuum tube units that would oscillate and generate sound. For a while, in the late '60s, uh, I was on staff at a recording studio in Connecticut. I had a lot of time to experiment. They had me producing some stuff. I recorded a couple of albums here with a jug band that I was part of before electronics. Uh, but I had already been listening to some classical electronic stuff, and it was mind-boggling that all the equipment that must have been needed, a room full of equipment just to make a noise. Uh, I forgot exactly when switched on Bach happened, but that was a huge instrument. You can only play one note at a time, and you needed all the patch cords. You know, to connect this to that uh, to make a sound happen. You had to build a sound, and because the term patch got carried forward to a point where uh, young musicians patch. What does that mean? They don't know, but they use the word anyway. It comes from plugging in all that stuff in the big modular Moog. Uh, I probably still have a recording around. There was an album, kind of Hank Bading's. Uh, he just looked interesting. There was a picture of equipment on the front. I bought it. Amazing textural stuff, all electronic. In that studio in Connecticut, they would leave me there in the middle of the night a lot, and I would experiment. Uh, I kind of learned how to. I learned about engineering and how to record stuff there. I wasn't trained properly, but I learned a lot. I trained properly. I mean, talking about people going and intern on the Phil Ramone or that kind of thing. I didn't get that, but I learned a lot. The head engineer there was very good and grumpy. He didn't really want to teach me, but I learned a lot anyway. Uh, One night I experimented to try to get electronic sounds, and the console I would take them one module and I would patch the output back into its own input. And I realized uh, it would feed back, obviously. And I realized I could change the feedback, sometimes the pitch, by messing with the equalizer. By moving the fader up and down, the pitch would change sometimes. And I would get, 5 or 6 of them happening, and I could, playing the faders. I just ran it through a shitload of reverb. Uh, uh, Delay echo meant you had to set up one of the tape recorders. Uh, Playback and take it back off the playback head. Uh, I did that, and especially back then, because there were no gadgets. You had to build what you wanted to use. Uh, reverb, uh, reverb and tape and delay were very much a part of the sound. You create an oscillation somehow, but you needed that extra dimension to give it space. Uh, Chorusing, you try to take two of those faders and tune them slightly apart. It could take you all day. But there were no gadgets to help us out. Reverb, great. It made everything work. Just get it swimming, and you got a texture. So that's where I got the bug, I think. Uh, and then the early '70s, there was a mini Moog, and I realized that you could. Wow, there it is in a little thing. I can carry this. I can take it home. Uh, it's just this little box. It was expensive at the time. Uh, I believe they were selling for over 2,000 when they first came out, which is, I mean, you're talking 50 years ago. It was a lot of money. Uh, but I did it. No, just a last bit from that experience at that studio. The head engineer, uh, he had really good ears and a good concept about learning stuff. Uh, he got into the studio business because he invented a microphone. It was actually a condenser mic. I can't remember. This is going way back, but he put it together, a smaller version of it, trying to emulate the Neumann. He didn't quite make that, but it was a good microphone. He put a battery in it. That's it. That's simple. So it was just a mic cord, plug it in, and it was set up so there was no cord plugged in. The battery was disconnected, obviously. Uh, and that studio had those microphones all over the place. He sold the patent, maybe to Vega or some microphone company, and that was it. But he stayed on as chief engineer. Uh, he was kind of into the music, but not completely. He was more into the process of recording the music. Uh, but I remember something we were working on late at night, and he was telling me about his vision for the future. Uh, uh, Mind you, this is 50 years, a little over 50 years ago. He said, first of all, it's all going to be computerized. And computers at the time were nobody had a computer. They were way too expensive and way too big. Uh, he said, you're going to be looking at a console it's uh, it's going to have 4 buttons on it: uh, start and stop. And I like it. I don't like it. And you would push start, the computer would make a noise. And you would say, I like that. It would expand on that noise, add something else. I don't like that. It would change direction, which meant anybody could sit there just pushing a couple of buttons uh, and create a piece of music that they liked. I said, yeah, well, I mean, you could screw up and get something you don't like, but the point was there. Everybody's making music strictly for themselves. They don't need anybody else. They just need to buy this gadget, which at the time would have been huge. Uh, not somebody's probably written software like that, which means I could probably buy it for $29.95 and do what he described. But he had that vision like 50 years ago, and this was just a guy in a small recording studio in Wallingford, Connecticut. And if a band was in there, they'd have to stop recording when a train went by outside. And he had this idea. And he never patented it. So, uh,
Well, it's a reality nowadays. I mean, the technology exists,
yeah.
and
And
it's like
it's what we,
it's a neural network. You just need somebody, like you need a human being or some data to decide what I like and what I don't
yeah.
like. Yeah,
And
yeah.
so, likelihood over the next 10 years, so it's probably going to evolve to that. I mean, right now, what I have around me on my desk is 2 computers, some mixers, your remote control, $8,000 synthesizer replaces everything I've had. Another thing that makes a good Rhodes sound and a decent piano sound. Samples in the computer. It was unheard of, not that long ago. Uh, it's going to get smaller. It's going to get cheaper, uh, and more people are able to do this uh, and do their own thing. I mean, that's been happening for a long time. It's a it's almost an echo of the '50s pop, where a bunch of people a band could go into somebody's basement and turn on a tape recorder and make a hit record. Uh, the only difference is that nobody's going to want to hear the record except them. But they'll be happy because they got what they wanted. Uh, I don't know. It'd be interesting to see what it's going to be like for 10 years. I probably won't be here, but you'll be. Write me a note.
Wow. Well, Pete, that's yeah. And maybe this is a good point where we stop for now, because I know we could be talking for another 2 hours easily. Well, wow. Like, as you've really put it well. Like, in a way, we've come full circle now after 70 years of
What goes around comes
recording
around, I
technology.
guess, all the cliches, but it's true. Uh, People change, but things don't change all that much. They just it, a new invention will help it stay the same. But people kind of want the same stuff. Most people are listening to the bulk of music that goes up there. It's like musicians listen critically and go. Uh, Most of it is like that was disco in the '70s. Something else in the '80s. Something else in the '90s. I did a series of albums, all electronic, in the '90s for a friend of mine who he now owns a drum cat company. But he had a. Oh, did you know them by chance? Drum cat. They make electronic controllers.
Okay,
Very
I
good,
do. Yeah,
very good high.
I do.
And Aria Bakutis, who owns the company, is an extremely good percussionist on mallets and I don't know if he plays drum kit, but he's a percussionist, but very good. So he's developed all this stuff. But he had another company at the time creating music. Uh, He'd done some of it himself, but he realized he was limited. with his instruments, because he doesn't play pianistic at all. Uh, it was niche marketing, selling relaxation music to massage therapists. Where did this come from? It made a good business out of it. Eventually, he stopped doing it. He just had maybe got bored, or other. He was developing the drum cat company and making new instruments. That was really taking his time. But he stopped doing them himself, and he said, Pete, can you do an album like this? Uh, it's got to relax people. Uh, the first criteria. Uh, I can't get grooving too hard. Uh, ideally, if I'm going to have a tempo at all, it should be heartbeat tempo. No percussion. No drums. No rhythm sections. Like all electronic. Uh, and each CD, 4 pieces, each one exactly 15 minutes long. Which, from feedback he'd gotten, his clients, uh, they liked that because they could time their sessions to the music. In other words, when the CD stopped, you throw the guy out, or whatever they do. Uh, and yeah, I did 3 of them, I think, and they're okay. They're interesting. Uh, but if you ask me for a 4th one, I go, geez, Mario, I mean, I can't groove at all, really, because it's getting kind of tedious. I mean, I can almost be watching television. It was my formula. I would start at something modal, keep it modal, put it in flat keys, heavy flat keys, which are mellower. Uh, uh, if you're into chakras, uh, the mellow chakras have more mellow colors, blue, purple, uh, which you can relate to heavy flat key, D flat. Well, that's rich purple. D natural. E was white. D is yellow. No, so I would G flat, everything in G flat, D flat. So I would go for maybe 5 or 6 minutes, just modulate slowly, textural in G flat. Uh, Maybe around 7 minutes, I'd move to a 4 chord. That's it. Hang there for a while. They come back, do a reprise at the end. That's it. I could almost be watching television while I do that, because a lot of it was like, oh, I see. Our time. Anyway, I got to a point I was just sick of my own playing. Uh, I, I would call up the most convenient sounds, a little melody different. So I did one, and I had done a synth melody through it. I just wiped the melody. I called a friend of mine, a jazz flutist, Ali Ryerson. It was terrific. I said, old friend of mine. I said, Ali, would you come in and play alto flute? It's real action music. We'll bring your alto flute. And she came to my apartment, and we took each piece of 4 of them, 15-minute pieces. I said, okay, this one it's kind of an E flat minor. Going to start there. Eventually, it's going to go to A flat major, and I'll wave at you when it's coming. Just play some stuff. Just play some moody stuff. Just played a little bit. She got a sound sheet. That's it. Go for it. That's it. 15 minutes later. This is good. I got to go downstairs and feed the meter. I'll be right back. Came back upstairs, did another one, and did 2 more. We did the album that way. I just re-released it because Ali sells them at gigs. I don't so much. Hey, let's do it. It's okay. Ali made it interesting for me. Anyway, she played some beautiful stuff. I retitled it, called Meditations. I photoshopped a picture of my backyard here, which is a big open field, and I photoshopped my dog. He's just lying there looking at some birds flying by. I also photoshopped the birds in. That's it. Meditations. uh,
Is that on Bandcamp, or where did you put that out?
uh,
Or
Ali,
do you have a CD?
Ali
Is it a
sells them at
CD?
gigs. I was selling them
Nice.
online for a while. She travels a lot and does a lot of clinics and a lot of students. So she keeps unloading. We keep doing a new pressing, mostly for her. I'll take some. I'll give them away. Uh, it's fun. I'll send you a copy. Well, I'll give you a copy. You're gonna be.
I'll see you in 2 days anyway.
Yeah. We'll have
Hey,
to
thank
do.
you so much, Pete. Yep. Thank you so much again.
Oh, this is a lot of fun. Great talking to you, man. And
Great to
we talk.
bye for now.
We just spent 2 hours talking about me. We should talk more. Talk about you some more. Yeah.
We'll do that next time.
Okay.